totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Bookedonrock.com is the website, and you can link up to all the social media sites there. Booked on Rock is on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Kimberly Mack is this episode's guest. She's the author of Time's Up. It's part of the 33 1/3 series of books. She focuses on the 1990 album Time's Up by Living Colour. Mack explores the album recorded in the aftermath of the critical and commercial success of the band's debut record, Vivid. Through interviews with members of Living Colour and others involved in the making of Time's Up, Mack explores the creation and reception of this artistically challenging album, while examining the legacy of this culturally important and groundbreaking American rock band. To hear all of Living Colour's Time's Up, head over to the show notes page. But first, here is Kimberly Mack. Hi, Kim. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
This is such a fun read because I've been a fan of Living Colour since the first album, 1989. I was a senior in high school, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Time flies. But this book is about the follow-up album. And that's where I want to start. I'm interested in why you chose this particular album. You write about the importance of Time's Up in the introduction. It's important from an artistic standpoint, a cultural standpoint, as well as a personal standpoint. You say this album marks a coming-of-age period for you as a fan of rock music and as a scholar and music critic. So can you talk about that and why you chose this specific album to write about?
Living Colour were just really and are really important to me. But at a particular time of my life, they were especially important because I grew up in Brooklyn, New York in the 1970s and came of age in the 1980s. And I loved rock. My mom was a big fan of rock. And she was, somebody who was a boomer who was born in 46 and loved rock and roll and then stuck around in the 70s and stuck with rock after it had become conflated with whiteness. And she wasn't deterred, and she just kept loving the music. So she was bringing home stuff like The Police. Like I remember hearing Roxanne for the first time, which was, it blew my mind. I love that song so much. And Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and Pat Benatar and Devo and Thin Lizzy and Sex Pistols. So she was bringing home a lot of like contemporary new wave and punk stuff. And I grew to really love this music as well. The whole time, though, I didn't really know very much about where the music came from. My mom also was a really into rock magazines. So she had like Rolling Stone and Cream and Trouser Press and Relics hanging around as well. And so I read those things in the house. And most of the pictures that I saw were of white rock stars. The bylines I assumed were all white people. So for me, rock was just white. And it was something that I loved a lot, but I just felt a bit distanced from it and alienated. And, when I went to rock shows, I talk about that in the book. I just, from the very first one, when I was just a kid, I was conscious of being I couldn't see any other Black people, but I'm sure there were a few Black people in the audience, but I was really conscious of there not being very many of us. So Living Colour, when they came on the scene, meant so much to me. And I remember watching Showtime at the Apollo with my mom on TV when Vivid came out, and then also watching again because they also came back on the show for Time's Up. And we were both just really, enamored with these four young Black men who rocked really hard and were awesome. But they also, looked like me, and that meant a lot. And I chose Time's Up because that was the record that I liked Vivid a lot. I loved Cult of Personality. I thought it was a good song. I thought it was a great song. But Time's Up, when I heard it for the first time, really kind of woke me up a little bit, and I'm going to say it didn't just wake me up in the sense that it was loud and angry and filled with passion, which was part of it. But it also, I think, woke me up to my own anger and my own kind of discomfort stemming from a childhood that was spent in a household that was chaotic, and violent and just unpredictable. And so hearing Time's Up and hearing the anger just gave me this outlet. And I realized that, oh, wow, like rock music, because again, I liked Van Halen, I liked Led Zeppelin, I did like some music that was a little heavier at times, but hearing that, especially the first song, Time's Up, just gave me a clue about like how heavier rock music or angrier rock music or faster rock music could help me to channel some of that anger. And it did make an impact on like my listening, I think, going forward, and other bands that I started to embrace that I didn't really, I'm not sure I would have embraced, so soon after if it hadn't been for Living Color. So Living Color meant a lot to me, and then of course, just when they came out in, 88 with Vivid and then continuing into Time's Up period, they were very, very vocal and loud, and they had a loud, sustained argument about rock's blackness. And they were really all about reclaiming rock as Black. And that was also really important. So all of those things made Living Color important to my musical development and personal development. And Time's Up in particular just gave me a way to deal with my own anger and an outlet for that, which was really important to me.
And for those not familiar with Living Color's background, can you talk about the band's origins and Mick Jagger's role in the band's early success and how they were a band who had to endure and overcome quite a bit of resistance in the early days? As guitarist Vernon Reid said, it complete and utter resistance.
Yeah, this is a New York band. They're all from New York, more or less, except for Muzz has some sort of Brooklyn association, although Will grew up in Queens. But this is a New York City band who they're all very different. Their backgrounds are actually different, but there are some very, I think, key similarities between their background. And two of them are just, they all grew up in kind of politically conscious Black households. They all grew up pretty much middle class, and they all had like a really diverse introduction to music. Like as Vernon put it, there were no guardrails around the music that he was listening to, and his parents never said, rock music is white boy music or whatever. So he and the rest of the band were listening to all kinds of things. Corey talked about just being in New York City and having music pouring out of the windows, which is very much a New York City thing. Particularly in the summer when a lot of people don't have, let's say, like central air or whatever, and they have bad air conditioning. And so the windows are wide open and you really are exposed to all that music. So they all kind of shared that in common. And, so for them, they all liked rock growing up as well as other kinds of music. And of course, Vernon formed the Black Rock Coalition with Greg Tate and Conda Mason. And really the whole idea behind that in 1985, and the whole idea behind the Black Rock Coalition was, kind of creating as Vernon puts it, naming a community that was unnamed. It was like musicians who were really into rock music and other forms of Black music, but felt like the industry and other people were putting guardrails up, and they wanted the chance to create music within the full, constellation of Black expression. And so this organization was, an advocacy group for those musicians who didn't want to be put into a box with, just hip hop or R&B. And they had this band, and the band, got really hot. They were playing in clubs and were kind of a really buzzy band. It was, Doug Wimbish, who happened to be playing on Mick Jagger's solo record, and Mick Jagger had heard the buzz and wanted to go hear them play, and did, and produced their demo. But I think a lot of people assume that all that had to happen is that Mick Jagger produced the demo, and then, all the doors would just open. And that actually isn't what happened. It still took them a while to get signed because there was so much resistance to, this idea of an all Black rock band, or really probably, I mean, we don't know, but even if there had been a couple of Black members in the band at that time, there may have still been a lot of resistance, but certainly this all Black hard rock band, like, people could not wrap their heads around it. And they had an uphill battle getting signed, and then, getting those songs played on radio, because rock radio was segregated. The genre of rock in general was segregated. The media, when they came on the scene, were just so focused on their race and their decision to play rock. So it was really just like everybody on that side. But then also of course the music industry was, white run. So, and MTV and everything else. So there's that. But then also Black folks were also confused, and not necessarily supportive of this band making these kinds of decisions to play this music. And then they ended up also having, some internal stuff in the Black Rock Coalition, because then, they were the band that kind of broke out. So then you had that kind of stuff. So they had a lot of, and then they had charges of being a sellout, because they then did find great commercial success with Vivid after touring for a while with the Stones on the Steel Wheels tour. So they got it from all directions. They were kind of in the crosshairs for a lot of different people for a while. So it was kind of amazing that they broke through the way they did.
One thing I didn't even know, reading the book, I found out Doug Wimbish is a local guy. He lives here in Connecticut, where I'm from. And I know that he eventually, and is still, their bassist. But I didn't know he had that role. I didn't know he was recording with Mick at the time, and suggested, like, hey, Mick, go check. Or Mick came to him and said, what's up with this band, Living Color? And Doug was like, yeah, man, go check them out. That I did not know. That's pretty cool. And then he ends up being their bassist.
Yeah.
Years later, yeah. An interesting quote from Corey Glover, the lead vocalist, regarding where the band was at when they went into the studio to record Time's Up. He told you, quote, despite the success on the outside, that wasn't what was happening on the inside. What was happening on the inside at that time?
I think a lot of that is about a kind of basic work ethic. And also, and then, this is a band with a really strong work ethic, and, a very quick side story. Greg Drew, Corey's vocal coach, I interviewed him for this book, and he had a lot of great stories. And one of the stories that didn't make it into the book was, early on, when he was working with them, he was staying, in a hotel while they were on the road, and, they got him a hotel room, and he's a very humble guy. So he was just like, oh, and it was like this really nice, kind of sweet kind of situation. And it was right next to Vernon. And he was like, oh, I don't know, this should be for me. This should be for somebody else. They're like, oh, no, it's for you. But it turns out that it was for him, because he was right next to Vernon, and Vernon practiced his guitar all night long. Like, he went into the wee hours.
That's like a true guitarist.
Like a true guitarist,
Sleeps with the guitar.
Yeah. And it was just incessant. And so, that told me a lot also about, just like Vernon's work ethic, the band's work ethic. Corey, you learn a lot about him with the vocal coach and how hard he works on his voice, which is an incredible voice still. And I'm sure a lot of that training has something to do with why he still has an incredible voice. So some of it was work ethic, but also I think it's important to kind of keep in mind their identities as Black people. And, I mentioned that they all kind of come from middle-class backgrounds, and that does afford them a certain amount of privilege growing up. And certainly, if you're selling millions of copies of your album, you have a certain kind of privilege at that point. But Vernon has also told stories about in the peak of their success at shows, and they're signing autographs and stuff. And there was one particular time where Vernon's simultaneously trying to hail a cab, while signing autographs, and can't get a cab.
Wow.
So I think this is a band that was always just keenly aware of their identity that's, intersectional. They're not just, rock stars that are enjoying success. They also are Black men, and they're Black men in the late 80s, early 90s, which is like a really low point for race relations in New York City in particular. So I think that's where that's coming from. Corey's really talking about, they never felt like they could just rest on their laurels. They never felt like they were done and okay, we did it, and now we're just going to be here. That was not how they operated.
They still had something to prove. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And I would think too, the label probably was expecting a Vivid Part 2, but what we get is not that. I mean, there are songs that are similar to the vibe or the sound of that first album, but man, they take some chances on this. And drummer Will Calhoun told you the band, they throw things out there to challenge themselves and see what happens. So I ask you now, what are the moments on this album that really stand out to you in terms of that mindset, like the musical challenges that really pay off?
Yeah, I mean, there are just so many. But I think, a couple of things that I really enjoy, I think, the collaborations and having people on there like Dougie Fresh and Queen Latifah, and Maceo Parker. Like, these are people who are not normatively associated with rock. And I think that was something that was kind of them not just settling into what they did before. I mean, again, I said, I do like Vivid. I think it's a good record, but I think it's a very kind of mainstream rock record that was very familiar and legible to like people who like metal and people who like hard rock. I don't think it was like super challenging for the listener who likes that kind of music. Again, great record, but I think it was a mainstream rock record. I think Time's Up is different in the sense that you do have these moments where the group is expanding ideas about what rock is. And this is something that Muzz talked about in the book. And we talked about stuff that didn't make it into the book, but just the whole thing about genre and what they were doing and being really conscious about wanting to adhere to the conventions of rock, but not wanting to be stifled by it and expanding what rock is. So yeah, you can have Queen Latifah on your record, but that doesn't mean that it's not a rock song still, and I think that white rock bands have historically gotten a pass with that kind of stuff and have been allowed to kind of I'm thinking Blondie here, one of my favorite bands. I mean, goodness knows, no one ever said, oh, is Blondie not a rock band? I mean, and they were doing everything from reggae to hip hop to disco to everything, right? Kiss got to do a disco song, so did the Stones, right? So I just think that Living Colour was doing stuff like that. I think they got punished for that actually with the second record, but that's some of the broad strokes. But also Elvis is Dead is another song that I think takes some really interesting chances, and some of that wasn't planned, right? So with Little Richard in particular, he decided that he wanted to do a rap and, in that middle in the chorus instead of singing the chorus. And that was not something that was planned. He just wanted to do that. And they were just like, well, it's Little Richard, so he can do whatever he wants to do. And it really, I think, worked well. And I always really appreciated and continue to appreciate just how clever that song is in terms of taking chances, because, you've got a song about Elvis, and particularly a song about kind of delusional Elvis fandom. And of course, that undercurrent of, Elvis is the king of rock and roll and questioning that and appropriation and stuff. But then you've got Little Richard, right? An architect of rock and roll who's on the record, who's rapping. And then you've got Mick Jagger. So that breakdown has a whole bunch of different voices saying, yes, Elvis is dead, right?
I was listening closely for Mick. When I read the book, I had no idea Mick's in there. I think that's him.
Yeah, Mick's in there. Mick says Elvis is dead. So I just always thought, okay, yeah, that's like another one of those, let's just try some stuff and see what happens. Or like New Jack with like the house, it's kind of like a house, it's like metal-y house music. They just threw a lot of really interesting things into the mix. And I think it made for a bold and confident and really interesting record.
Yeah, who was the one that was on the elevator with Little Richard? Was it Vernon?
It's Corey.
Corey, and he's just like, okay, little Richard standing next to me.
Yeah.
Well, the opening track is also interesting too because it's punk. It's Bad Brains. This was Corey Glover's chance to sing a punk rock song. His lyrics addressing the environmental issues that are going on at the time. He did his vocals in one take, and he was serious about being in one take. He left the building after recording his vocals.
Yeah, no, that's I love that. That was one of my favorite stories also. Greg Drew came with all the great stories.
He really did. He's got a ton of them.
He does. But yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that so much. And and Corey was telling me that, yeah, he always wanted to sing a punk rock song. It was just a dream of his. And also he just felt like he wanted to do it in a punk rock way. And he's not going to do a bunch of takes and make it pretty. He's just going to do it one time. And whatever it is what it is. And I'm always amazed when I listen and remember that because it sounds freaking awesome,
Yeah.
But that was one take.
Yeah, and Pride was a track that was Will Calhoun's baby. This is interesting too because I always thought maybe Corey wrote all the lyrics and then the music was all maybe Vernon coming to them, but everybody plays a role in here. And on Pride, Will Calhoun, he talked about the origins of the song. This dates back to his junior high days, right? Lyrically.
Yeah. It was stuff. He had notebooks and he, one of the things I love about this song, and of course, it wasn't lost on me when I was interviewing them, was just like how timely this song is and how it's still like so much of the lyrical content on this record is still current and of current contemporary relevance. And Will is somebody who grew up in an Afrocentric home. He, had a sense of like Black people's accomplishments across the diaspora as a kid. And so he would go to school and he would know things about what Black people have accomplished that, his friends didn't know and sometimes his teachers didn't know. And so, I think that was, a frustrating experience for him at times. And so he had all these notebooks kind of, I would imagine, complaining about that or, addressing that. And he found some of this stuff. And between that and I think his frustration with the media, and not everybody in the media, but, a fair number of writers really did, home in on this question of Black people, Black men playing rock music. And, that was frustrating for him. So it was just kind of like all of the frustrating things that he could kind of put together in a song. And, with the underlying message being of, again, his own pride, his own sense of the importance of Black people, knowing their history, knowing where they really come from, knowing where rock music comes from. And, this song was just all about that. And that's kind of, like the glue holding it together is this notion of the importance of Black folks having pride, in who we are.
Expect the unexpected with Living Color. I saw them at Toad's Place in New Haven, Connecticut, and maybe it was early 2000s, I can't recall. But they broke into this long instrumental. It was like this jazz fusion thing. And you could tell like some people in the crowd, like, what's going on? Where's Cult of Personality?
Right.
But it was like, you could tell it was like, we're going to do what we want to do here. And we hope that you follow us. And I think they've had a loyal following, right up until this day. But that's the chances that they took. And one of my all-time favorite Living Color songs is Broken Hearts from Vivid. And Vernon told you that Love Rears Its Ugly Head is a companion song to Broken Hearts. Can you share the story? Here's another great Greg Drew story. Greg, again, Corey's vocal coach. He's got a story about a phone message from his girlfriend, and it's taped to Corey's mic stand.
Yes. No, I love that story too. So Love Rears Its Ugly Head. Yeah. So for Vernon, this was, the same woman who he falls in love with. First Broken Hearts is the ending, right? And Love Rears Its Ugly Head is the beginning. But for Corey to get into the mindset of singing the song, Greg Drew decided to use a little psychology and apparently there was a young woman who was, I guess they were dating, but perhaps wanted to be a little more serious than Corey wanted to be.
Yeah, a little overbearing. He's
Yeah, that's the way
give me
Greg
some
put it.
space here.
Yeah, and so this was a different time, so messages were written on little message pads and left for people in the studio, and apparently this young woman called Corey, and then Greg gave the message to Corey, and Corey kind of like wasn't that interested, but Greg held on to it, and then when it was time to sing Love Rears Its Ugly Head, he taped the message to his vocal stand and his little mic stand, and Corey was like, okay. I'm ready to sing the song now, which I thought was hilarious.
I love it. Greg Drew he's the mastermind. Is he still?
Yes.
Does he still work with Corey as his vocal coach, or
not now?
Okay.
No, not at this moment. But he worked with him for a while, beyond the first few records, and some of the theater stuff that he did. A voice is a tough thing, and particularly as you age, which is one of the reasons also why I continue to be so impressed by Corey's voice, because his voice right now sounds amazing.
Yeah. He's not mentioned when they talk about the singers who can still sing. He should be the one, although he's not as old as he's not up there with like the Mick Jaggers and the Rod Stewarts and all that, but still he's got it. Yeah, he's got an outstanding voice.
Right, and that is one of the things that is hard to maintain into your 50s and 60s and beyond, right? So I do think, again, as I said, that foundation was helpful. But the thing with Corey, and I don't think this made it into the book either, was Corey always had a great voice, like a great tone and a great sounding voice. But in the beginning, like when he was playing gigs with Living Colour, he would blow his voice out after like a show, in part because, it's a rock band and they're loud. And I think Vernon was particularly loud. And so he would do the show and he would sound great, but then he couldn't sing for like a week. And that wasn't going to work, right? So that's one of the things that prompted him not to make his voice sound better, but for it to become stronger and for it to be something that he can sustain night after night, a couple of times a night if he had to, over a really long period of time. And so that's what happened. And that's, and because to sing the way he does and to sing over a very, very loud rock band, that's not easy. And in order to perform at that high level, the vocal coach helped a lot.
The Booked on Rock podcast will be back after this. Someone Like You, bassist Muzz Scullings, he explained to you what was behind the word sung for each chorus. Now, the words are exactly the same, but he wanted them to have a different meaning each time the listener hears it. Can you expand on that? What did he mean by that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, he wants the song to be, clearly it's about police brutality and the potential that gets snuffed out when, young people are murdered, before their time. And so he was really interested in having some ambiguity with the song and allowing the audience to listen to that chorus and kind of think about all of the different ways that someone can not only interpret what those words mean, but also react to those words and decide a course of action as a result of what's going on. And he never wanted to feed the meaning to the listener, but he wanted the listener to contemplate, right, while listening, like, okay, what is the best way to handle, this assault on Black people's bodies? Like, what is the best way to handle this? And what does it mean? It's never too late to change your ways. Like, what does that actually mean? It's never too late to change your ways. If you are somebody who's brutalizing people, it's never too late to change your ways. If you are thinking about taking a course of action that's some sort of retribution that's violent, yeah, like, what is it? Like, he just didn't want to tell the listener. He wanted the listener to come up with that themselves.
Now, some of the sonic approaches to the songs, like Type and Muzz Scullings, again, we go back to him. He went into detail in the book about how the guitar and the bass lines were sounding identical. So as a result, the bass wouldn't be heard as much. So he comes up with a solution. I'm going to read this quote. And this is, I love this. He says, I use my Eventide harmonizer H3000B and the TC Electronic 2290 together. Got into it. It's an amazing effects unit. Basically, the song was created with 5 tracks of bass. In fact, most of the album has 5 tracks of bass, 2 stereo effects, chorus, reverb, a little bit of delay, and 2 amp signals. Not stereo amp, but 2 separate bass amplifier signals, each delayed enough milliseconds to create the Haas effect, which is when you perceive that you're hearing stereo when it's not really there, but the brain tricks itself. Wow. Yeah. I mean, what was that experience like for you interviewing the members, like when they get into this type of stuff?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
all these guys are amazing musicians, but I'm thinking you had to be like, wow, this is some
Yes.
serious stuff here.
Yeah. No.
Any standout quotes from you regarding like the nuts and bolts of the music like that?
No, thank you. Thank you for asking that question because, I'm not a musician and I'm a writer and somebody who is a scholar of popular music studies and historic music history, but I'm not a musician. So, I was very upfront about that. And, so I kind of, the way I handled it was making it really clear that I wanted the band members to share what it was that was important to them about the music and how they wanted to share it. It was interesting because I did also interview Ed Stasium, the producer of the record, and Paul Hamingson, the engineer, and Dennis Diamond, Vernon's guitar tech. And so I had a lot of kind of technical people that I was talking to, but Ed Stasium is somebody who would say himself that he wasn't somebody who took a super technical approach to what he was doing. A lot of it was feel, and he has just like an incredible feel. Paul Hamingson, as the engineer, was a little more nuts and boltsy and technical when we were talking. Muzz Skillings was extremely technical when we were talking, and that was what was of value to him. Like that's what he really wanted to talk about the most, was the music and the sounds and how he got the sounds. Ology, he really wanted to talk about ology, which is of course a really interesting little short piece.
Yeah, 3 instrumental pieces, right?
Yeah.
All together.
Yeah, and and all bass and just these incredible bass sounds and tones. And so he really wanted to talk about that. Like that was what he was interested in discussing. So I was happy to do that and happy to ask questions and to make sure that I understood what he was talking about. And it was great. And I also, and then Vernon, by the way, I had to prompt him more to talk about that stuff. That's not actually what Vernon's most interested in talking about. He's really interested in talking about culture and the historical context of things and the lyrics and the sounds, but he wasn't as interested in talking about the heavy technical aspects of what he did. I really actually had to pull that out of him more.
Wow, that's surprising. Usually guitarists, that's what they love talking about.
At least for this book. And, I'm not going to make a unilateral comment that he's not interested in that in general. But for this book, he was really not as focused on the heavily technical aspects of his playing. And he was much more interested in talking about, like the people and his experiences and what the songs mean and where he was from a historical context or what was going on with him when the songs were being made and when the band was coming up. And he was also very, very forthcoming, as they all were, about his childhood.
Kim Mack is our guest. She's the author of the 33 1/3 book on Living Colors, Time's Up, which is out now. And by the way, I didn't realize these guys are big Rush fans too. Type was a nod to their love of Rush, as is the following track, Information Overload, and Fight the Fight, very personal song for Corey. A quote he gave you, he said, quote, "Every aspect of my life has been in a struggle to change the system." What are your thoughts on Corey as a lyricist, as an artist? And what was your impression of him after interviewing him?
Yeah, I mean, Corey is somebody who had spent, and I think some of this didn't actually make it into the book either. These are short books, so one of the hardest things about writing this book, and this is my second book, and I've written a lot of other short pieces, and I would say this is the most challenging thing I've ever written for a whole number of reasons. But one of the hardest things was just in all the interviews. I had about 20 hours of interview material, and like I don't even know how much made it in, like not a whole lot comparatively. So, but he he talked about growing up, in an activist family and marching with, family members and from a young age. And so for him, this marrying of music and art and politics was not, he didn't have to be sold on that. That just made a lot of sense to him, given how he was raised. And so, yeah, no, he's an incredible writer. I think, you really see that with Time's Up. That's just his, I think, just the words behind this wake up call about the environment, are great. And he's also, just very serious minded, like really all the members of Living Color. I mean, I think that's something that comes through in this book, I hope, is just, in all the ways that they probably grew tired of having to talk about race and social justice type issues, and also their race in terms of the music they were playing. As much as all of that must have been tiring, I really can't think of like 4 better equipped people to have done that work, because they were just so good at it. This again, back to what I was saying before about, they were again a band who was experiencing commercial success, but they were experiencing this success personally at a time when Black people in New York City, in the United States in general, but in New York City in particular, were really having a hard time. I mean, it was, the time of trickle down economics and Reagan and, all of the war on drugs stuff that led to mass incarceration. I mean, it was just, the crack epidemic. I mean, there's just like a lot going on that was really rough on Black communities. And they were perfect at talking about this stuff. And it was necessary and important that they were there. So I think that Corey is, much like the rest of the band, like really, really thoughtful, obviously super, intelligent, but also just like, not just opinionated, but really a lot of their comments and thoughts and conversations around these issues were informed, like, with real like reading and, solid educational, underpinning, not just like random opinions. They were really speaking from both experience, lived experience, and also education.
And I almost forget too, he is a good actor.
Yes.
Right? That was his first career choice was acting.
Yeah.
But then music became his main, although he's doing both at the same time. I remember he was in his Platoon, I think he's in.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Solace of You, that's probably my favorite from the album. And he told you it was influenced by South African music. Greg Drew, here we go with another Greg Drew story. You could write a whole book on Greg Drew. He talked to you about Corey's vocals on the track, and there's a moment when Sinead O'Connor's Nothing Compares to You video came on, and that would influence Corey. This is when he's taking another crack at the vocals, so this is the second time around?
Yeah, so I mean, and this is something that, again, the original motivation behind working with Greg was about, strengthening the voice and being able to have it be at full power over a sustained amount of time. But, in time, I think Greg also was able to just, help with songs, like as they were being constructed and, and Corey's contributions to the song. And so with Solace of You, he had done a take that was good, as Greg put it. from his perspective, it was good. Like it was fine, but it wasn't like great, but it was good. And he thought it could be better. And he was trying to express what it is that he felt like needed to happen for the vocals to kind of open up. And he was watching MTV and the Nothing Compares to You video. And the way he explained it to Corey was some singers, they're like, it's like a hose that they're spraying out, and they're kind of, I think what he means by that metaphor is, it's like the vocals are going out and they're kind of like more like an assault, or more like perhaps even it distances the audience a little bit. But some vocalists bring you in, and it's like they're giving you a big hug, is the way he put it. And Nothing Compares to You was that. And he was basically saying to Corey, that's what you want to go for, that right there. And it connected, it clicked. Corey did another take, and it was beautiful.
Nailed it. Yeah. And then Vernon told you that the last track on the record is the most important song on the album, and that's This Is the Life. Can you talk about why Vernon feels that way, and also what Corey had to say about his emotional connection to the song?
I think for Vernon, this song is important because of its portability. It's something where, I mean, it's my favorite song on the record, and I always feel like it's like a nice bookend. So the way the record starts, of course, is Time's Up, which is this like, kind of loud wake up call about, the environment. But we could also say it's a wake up call. The whole album is called Time's Up, right? So it's just a wake up call to all of these different issues, right? And all of the things that we need to be thinking about as humans. And This Is the Life always feels like at the end is kind of like a settling down of like, okay, now we're all together, now we're all listening, now we're all paying attention, and let's talk about these things that make us all human and connect us. And This Is the Life is something that I feel like is a very universal message of, we have a path that we're walking down, we are who we are, yes, we can grow and we can change, and we have some impact on what happens in our life, but we also are in the bodies we're in, and we're in, we have the whatever circumstances we have or whatever personalities we have, often those are not going to change that much. And so it's kind of like, how do you accept who you are and the life you have and love the life you have? Also, what's so wonderful about that song, and why I think Vernon likes it so much too, is that it's really speaking to these other universal things that are just going to happen. And these were like young, when Vivid came out, Vernon was 30, but everyone else in the band was like 24. These are like young people. But eventually your loved ones are going to die. You're not going to have all of the things that maybe you thought you wanted, at the end. So it's like you have to make peace with this life. And that song always has been very meaningful to me personally, also as somebody who's always been a bit of a striver and just wanting things to kind of hurry up and happen. And that song has always kind of settled me down and gotten me through stuff. And also the way Vernon put it, which I think is great, is that song for him is something that's like always there and always consistent. And it was there when the band was on the top. It was there when, as he put it, the grand parade moved on, which I thought was, of course, typical, really eloquent Vernon. And it was there, when the band loved each other, when the band was fighting. And it was there when Greg Tate, his dear friend, was alive. And also it's here still, now that Greg Tate is not with us anymore. So I think those are the reasons why. But then, and then also Corey, we had a conversation that didn't make it into the book about our shared sense of alienation at times, being rock fans in white rock scenes. And I talked about, because I never I didn't have my hair colored a certain way, or I didn't have like a uniform that I guess, and also my skin color, it was like a whole bunch of things. And being, a young girl too. I think it was like a lot of things where people would always be surprised, like when they found that I liked rock. Oh, you don't look like you'd like rock, kind of thing, for like all these reasons. And Corey also could relate to that. So that song also spoke to him in this, accepting kind of the body you're in and the things that might not be legible to somebody else, but it makes you you. So yeah, they both, I think, found a lot of personal resonances in that song.
Yeah, I love that they recorded it in complete darkness.
Yeah.
So next time you listen to that song, whoever's listening now, imagine those guys in complete darkness. Yeah, that's cool. Producer Ed Stasium told you that Time's Up is truly the only masterpiece that he ever worked on because of its fluency from beginning to end, how the songs intertwine, and how the lyrical messages have not lost their relevance since its release over 30 years ago. A great example is that last track. How would you best describe this album to somebody maybe who hasn't heard it at all, or it's been a long time since they've listened to it?
I think I would describe it as an album that if you listen to it right now in 2023, it sounds fresh. I mean, every time I listen to it, it doesn't feel dated to me. It doesn't sound old. It sounds like it could have been made this year, in part because of I think the fluidity between the different categories of music. I think artists do that more now than what was happening in the late 80s or early 90s. So I would say this is a record that's going to sound kind of familiar in some ways to you. And sonically, it's not going to be like, oh, this is old or whatever. Also, I would say it's just a fantastic record in terms of the level of musicianship, the level of Corey's vocals, and just the songs themselves. I think the songcraft on all of them are amazing. It's just, I think it's like a consistently strong record. I don't think there's a weak track on that record. And then I would say from a lyrical standpoint, for better, for worse, probably for worse, so much of it, again, could have been written right now. History is a lie that they teach you in school, a fraudulent view called the golden rule. I mean, when I hear those lyrics, I think about all of the kind of, panics around, in K through 12 around critical race theory and banning books and all this stuff. It's like, I think about that when I hear that song, Time's Up. Yeah, Corey was sounding an alarm, but now the environment is worse. Like we didn't listen to the alarm, information overload. It's kind of predicting the chaos of the internet and social media. This is the life. You could also think about it in terms of social media and, what young people are kind of dealing with in terms of, there have been studies about young girls in particular and how detrimental the internet has been for young teenage girls on their self-esteem, on their feelings about their bodies and their physical attractiveness. It's just been terrible. So yeah, I think this is a record where I would say for somebody right now, for a young somebody right now, there's so many things on there that you can listen to and get something out of, even though it was recorded more than 30 years ago.
Do you know if they've played this album in its entirety ever in concert? Because that would be really cool.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. They may have when they had the tour, because I think they were touring like Stain, they just had the 30th anniversary of Stain this year. And I don't know if they've played Stain in its entirety, but that's a great question. I don't know the answer, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Because bands are doing that, which is a great idea. Yeah. And that would be the perfect one to do because it's just,
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. Timeless. Yeah. And I'm looking quickly on Wikipedia. Apparently they are working on a new album. Hopefully. Is that the case? Yeah. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
They released Stain after that. That was 93. Kaleidoscope, 2003. The Chair in the Doorway, 2009. That's the one I think that has Back in Black on it. The cover of Back in Black. I think
it's Kaleidoscope.
Yeah. Chair in the Doorway might be the one. There's one that they wrote about 9/11, which is so powerful. Flying. You know that one?
Mhm.
And Shade 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to see some new music from those guys. Well, the book is out now. It's Time's Up, part of the 33 and a Third series. It's out through Bloomsbury Books and available wherever books are sold. And where can people find you online, Kim?
Yeah, you can find me at kimberlymack.com, KIMBERLYMACK.com. And I'm just finishing up a book tour. I actually have been on a national book tour, mostly Midwest, but also I was in New York and Chicago. I will be in Los Angeles on June 23rd at Book Soup. And then there's also a chance there'll be some other dates that are coming up in September. I'm hoping to possibly do something with Vernon, so we're talking about that.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so just go to my website and you'll see what's up.
Yeah, how nice is it to be part of this series, the 33 and a Third series?
Yeah, I'm thrilled. That was a bucket list thing for me for sure.
I can imagine. Yes, Kim, thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you again for having me.
That's it. It's in the books.